freezing night in February 1959, 9 experienced hikers suddenly cut their way out of their own tent. Not through the door, they sliced it open from the inside. Then they ran, barefoot, into the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains. The temperature outside was nearly -30 degrees Celsius. Some of them wore only thin clothes. Some had no shoes at all. Hours later, they were dead. But what investigators discovered next turned this tragedy into one of the most disturbing mysteries in history. One hiker had a crushed skull. Another had broken ribs, as if hit by a car. One woman's tongue was missing. Yet there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints of attackers, no clear explanation. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the strangest, unsolved mysteries ever recorded. What could possibly make 9 experienced hikers run half-naked into a deadly snowstorm? To understand this terrifying story, we must go back to the Soviet Union in 1959. In January 1959, a group of young adventurers set out on what was supposed to be a challenging but exciting winter expedition. The group was led by a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. Dyatlov was an experienced hiker. He had already completed several difficult mountain expeditions. Joining him were 8 other skilled hikers, students and graduates who shared a passion for exploration and adventure. Their destination was a remote mountain region deep within the Ural Mountains. The journey was meant to test their endurance, skill, and teamwork. It was classified as a Grade 3 expedition, the most difficult category in Soviet hiking at the time. But for these experienced hikers, it was supposed to be manageable. None of them knew that this expedition would become one of the most chilling mysteries in history. The team began their journey by train, traveling across the vast Soviet landscape. Eventually, they reached a small northern settlement called Ivdel. From there, they continued deeper into the wilderness by truck and ski. As they moved further north, civilization slowly disappeared. Villages became rare. Roads ended. Soon, the hikers were completely surrounded by endless forests and mountains. The winter conditions were harsh. Snow covered everything. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. But the group was well prepared. They carried heavy backpacks filled with food, cameras, maps, and winter gear. Despite the brutal cold, the hikers seemed happy. They joked, sang songs, and took photographs along the way. Those photographs would later become some of the last clues investigators would ever see. At the beginning of the expedition, the group originally had 10 members. But early in the journey, one of the hikers became sick. His name was Yuri Yudin. Yudin began suffering from severe joint pain and exhaustion. After discussing the situation with the group, he made the difficult decision to turn back. He was the only member of the expedition who survived. Years later, Yudin would say that leaving the group was the most painful decision of his life, but it also saved him. The remaining 9 hikers continued deeper into the mountains, unaware that they would never return. By the end of January, the group had reached one of the most remote regions of the Ural Mountains. Their goal was to reach a mountain known as Kolatsiakal. The name comes from the language of the local Mansi people, and it translates to something chilling: the Mountain of the Dead. Despite the ominous name, the hikers continued their journey. On February 1st, 1959, they began climbing the snowy slopes of the mountain, but heavy winds and poor visibility forced them to stop earlier than planned. Instead of descending into the nearby forest for shelter, they made a decision that would later confuse investigators. They pitched their tent directly on the exposed mountainside. The tent stood alone in the freezing darkness. That night, something happened. Something that terrified 9 experienced hikers so much, they fled into the snow without even putting on their boots. Weeks passed. The hikers were expected to send a telegram once they returned to civilization. But no message ever came. At first, their families assumed the group was simply delayed. Winter expeditions often ran behind schedule. But as more time passed, concern grew. Eventually, a search party was organized. Rescuers began combing the mountains for any sign of the missing hikers. What they discovered shocked everyone. Search teams eventually located the hiker's tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. But something about it was deeply disturbing. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Not unzipped, not carefully opened. Cut open in a hurry. Inside the tent, rescuers found boots, warm clothing, food, cameras, personal belongings. Everything the hikers needed to survive the cold had been left behind. Outside the tent, investigators found a line of footprints leading away into the snow. The footprints told a horrifying story. They showed that the hikers had walked away calmly, not running, not fighting, just walking, barefoot, into the freezing night. About 1.5 kilometers away from the tent, search teams discovered the first two bodies. They belonged to two hikers named Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko. Their bodies were found near the remains of a small campfire. They were wearing very little clothing. Both had died from hypothermia, but the most disturbing detail was the condition of the nearby tree. Branches had been broken up to 5 meters high. It looked as though someone had desperately tried to climb the tree, perhaps to see something, or to escape something. Investigators began to realize that whatever happened that night had forced the hikers to flee in terror. But the worst discoveries were still ahead. Over the next few weeks, search teams continued exploring the snowy wilderness of the Ural Mountains. Gradually, more bodies were discovered. Some were lying between the tent and the forest, as if they had tried to crawl back to safety. Others were buried deep beneath the snow. But when investigators finally examined the last 4 bodies, the mystery took a far darker turn. Because their injuries were unlike anything rescuers expected, and those injuries would transform the Dyatlov Pass incident into one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern history. As the search teams continued exploring the snowy slopes of the Ural Mountains, the situation became more disturbing with every discovery. After finding the first 2 bodies near the fire, rescuers began searching the area between the forest and the abandoned tent. Not long after, they discovered another body. It belonged to the expedition leader, Igor Dyatlov. His body was found lying face down in the snow. What shocked investigators was the direction he was facing. Dyatlov appeared to be trying to return to the tent. A few hundred meters away, rescuers found another member of the group. She was Zinaida Kolmogorova. Like Dyatlov, she also seemed to be crawling back toward the tent. Soon after, another body was discovered. This one belonged to Rustem Slobodin. At first glance, his death seemed similar to the others, hypothermia caused by the freezing temperatures. But when investigators examined his body more closely, they discovered something strange. Slobodin had a fractured skull. The injury was serious. But strangely, it did not appear to be immediately fatal. It was as if something had struck him with incredible force. Now investigators were facing an even bigger mystery. What could cause such injuries in the middle of a remote mountain without leaving any obvious evidence? For weeks, rescuers continued searching through deep snow across the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. But the remaining 4 hikers were nowhere to be found. It wasn't until May 1959, when the snow began to melt, that the final bodies were discovered. They were found deep inside a ravine, buried beneath several meters of snow. The hikers were Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. And this is where the mystery became truly horrifying. When medical examiners studied the bodies of the final 4 hikers, they discovered injuries unlike anything seen before in the investigation. One hiker had a massive skull fracture. Another had multiple broken ribs. But the most disturbing case was Lyudmila Dubinina. She had suffered severe chest injuries, with several ribs completely crushed. Doctors later said the damage looked similar to injuries caused by a powerful car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, no signs of a physical attack. Even stranger, Dubinina's tongue was missing. Part of her lips and facial tissue were also gone. For investigators, this discovery was deeply disturbing. What could possibly cause such injuries in the middle of a frozen mountain wilderness? the Soviet government quickly launched an official investigation into the mysterious deaths. Investigators carefully studied the campsite, the bodies, and the surrounding area. They found no evidence of other human footprints, weapons, or signs of a violent struggle. The footprints leading away from the tent belonged only to the 9 hikers. This meant something extremely strange had happened. Whatever forced the group to flee, it had not left visible tracks. Eventually, Soviet authorities closed the case with a vague and mysterious conclusion. They stated that the hikers died because of a compelling natural force, but they never explained what that force actually was. The area around Dyatlov Pass was soon closed to the public for several years, and for decades, the truth remained hidden behind secrecy and speculation. Over the years, the Dyatlov Pass incident gave rise to countless theories. Some of them were scientific, others were far more mysterious. One of the earliest theories suggested that the hikers were caught in a snow avalanche. An avalanche could explain why they suddenly fled the tent in panic. But this explanation has several problems. The slope where the tent was located was not steep enough for a large avalanche, and the tent itself was still standing when rescuers found it. If a massive avalanche had struck the area, the tent would likely have been completely buried. Another theory suggested that the hikers accidentally wandered into a secret Soviet military test. Some witnesses in nearby villages reported seeing strange orange lights in the sky on the night of the tragedy. These lights could have been experimental rockets or weapons. Supporters of this theory believe the hikers may have been exposed to a powerful blast or shockwave, but there has never been solid proof that military testing caused the deaths. In recent years, scientists have proposed another fascinating explanation. It involves something called infrasound. Infrasound is a type of sound wave that humans cannot hear, but it can still affect the human body. Strong winds passing over mountain slopes can sometimes create powerful infrasound vibrations. These vibrations may trigger feelings of panic, anxiety, and intense fear. Some scientists believe that strange wind conditions on the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl could have produced powerful infrasound. If the hikers suddenly experienced overwhelming panic, they might have rushed out of the tent in confusion and fear. But even this theory does not explain the severe injuries found on some of the bodies. In 2020, researchers revisited the mystery using modern computer simulations. Scientists studied how snow and wind behave on mountain slopes similar to the location of the tragedy. Their results suggested that a small delayed avalanche might have occurred. Unlike a massive avalanche, this type of snowslide could strike suddenly and violently. If a slab of heavy snow crashed into the tent, it could have caused the hikers to panic and escape immediately. Later, as they struggled through the freezing darkness, some may have fallen into the ravine, causing the severe injuries discovered months later. While this explanation answers many questions, not everyone is convinced. Some mysteries of the Dyatlov Pass incident remain unsolved. More than 60 years later, the frozen slopes of the Ural Mountains still guard their secrets. 9 experienced hikers, 1 terrifying night, a tent cut open from the inside, and a desperate journey into the freezing darkness. The Dyatlov Pass incident continues to fascinate historians, scientists, and mystery lovers around the world. Perhaps one day, the mountains will finally reveal what truly happened on that cold February night in 1959. But until then, the Dyatlov Pass mystery remains exactly what it has always been. One of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in history.